Hi there. My name's Mark Unwin, and I'm one of the co-founders of askKira.com, the UK's first and best AI education assistant and coach. Kira's been developed with 103 teachers, senior leaders, teachers, ECTs, Senkos, people working within UK schools to help with well-being, to help with workload, and to help with expert advice. And Kira is a member of this team. We wake it up by saying, "Hi, Kira," and we can converse with it and chat with it in a completely different way than it's possible to do with ChatGPT. Because it's been programmed by 103 people working within schools, it understands what it's like to work within an English school, what our ethoses are, and how we prefer to work. And we can talk to it in the same way we would talk to somebody in a classroom, talk to somebody in a corridor, and it'll provide us with well-being advice. It'll help provide us with workload. What I wanted to talk about today a little bit is where Kira came from. So Kira's built on two ideas. The first idea is that AI could be an enormous force for good within education, but only if AI stands for augmented intelligence. So only if AI is in the hands of trained professionals who can use it as a tool to help them, but always using their training and their knowledge and their expertise to guide the AI. And we do believe that if AI is artificial intelligence, if it replaces skilled professionals, then it'll be a force for greater harm within education. And Kira wants to be on the side of being a force for good. And the second reason for its development was to attempt to solve some of the problems around recruitment and retention of teachers. And the best way of illustrating that is by way of a story. So when my wife was younger, some years ago, in Oldham, she used to go to school with her primary school teacher. So every morning she'd leave her house, go across the road, get in Mrs. Curran's car, and drive to the local primary school. And Mrs. Curran used to go into her classroom while my wife went into the playground, and then Mrs. Curran would come out, collect the class, teach them all day, and then at the end of the day would take my wife home in the same car. And it feels very much to me, as somebody who's led schools in 5 cities over the last 15 years, that we're a long way away from the ability to do the job of a teacher within a school in a period that is that short. And because of that, Mrs. Curran was able to thrive in the profession for 38 years, I believe, bring up 2 daughters, and be a respected member of the community. And the job was flexible enough to work around family commitments, provided great status in the community and employment opportunities for women at a time when fewer existed than they do now. And we seem a long way away from that. And my belief is that AI could be an opportunity to get closer to that and address some of the workload and well-being challenges that we have within the profession. And the best possible illustration maybe would be if we think about some of the jobs that Mrs. Curran and her cohort, my Auntie Barbara, my Auntie Pat, who also worked in primary schools in the 80s and who also had long careers, the sort of jobs that they wouldn't be expected to do. So one of the things that primary school teachers at the time didn't have to do would be to send an email to parents. So I'm going to copy these in for speed. But we might chat to Kira and we might say, please can you write me an email to a parent that can be a bit tricky, asking them to come into a meeting about a child's behaviour. A child's been disrupting lessons following a good start to the year. And Kira will do that. So Kira will draft us an email. And you might say, well, ChatGPT would draft the email. The difference is that because Kira knows what the ethos of an English school is, it'll draft that email in a way that's very similar to the way that we would do that within schools. So it's talk about commending the child for the positive start that they've made, the great moments they've had, some challenges, some difficulties that they might have, but also about the right support to overcome hurdles, to work together collaboratively with the parents, and talking about partnership work with the parents. And because of the way that Kira's been programmed, the email that it will generate is very different to the email that ChatGPT, for instance, would generate in the same, given the same prompt. And that means two things. It means that it's not obvious that it's been generated by an AI. Secondly, it means that it needs less adaptation and editing by the member of school staff before it gets sent out. And in order to send it out, all the school staff would need to do would be to press the copy button on that clipboard there, and that will copy it to the clipboard, and you can drop it into your email software. So it will address one of the problems. Mrs. Curran didn't have to send emails to parents, and that can be something, particularly younger staff, can spend an awful lot of time trying to craft an appropriate email to a parent, especially one where it's about a difficult situation, a difficult subject. And the other thing that Mrs. Curran didn't have to do was to read long newsletters from CEOs, from head teachers, or indeed letters from the DFE or from the local authorities and partnership and all the other external organisations that we now work with that are more recent. And one of the things that Kira can do is to read for the member of staff. So it can read the newsletter and to precis that into the three important points, so that the staff member can save some time to work on planning lessons, to work on building great relationships with the children, and to work on how to move their learning forward. Another thing that Mrs. Curran and school staff in the 80s didn't have to do that they now have to do, partly because of Ofsted's focus at the moment, but also because of changes in the profession over the last 15 years, is there was no or very little subject leadership in comparison to subject leadership now. So we might talk to Kira. We might say, "Oh, I'm super stressed. I've forgotten that I've got to give a staff meeting tonight as the geography subject lead about the importance of map work." And that's an area for development, and we might tell it that we want a presentation for 15 minutes that's interactive and interesting. And I know from experience that some of the younger, less experienced members of staff working in small rural schools that take on multiple subject leadership responsibilities, find the planning of staff meetings difficult, can create social anxiety, and also is an area that sometimes exposes where a staff member has been asked to lead a subject that they're not as knowledgeable about or passionate about by virtue of the needs of the school. And Kira can help with that. So as well as providing an overview of what the presentations could look like, it can also provide extra details or explanations. So we might say, great, please can you give me an explanation that can help me deliver slide 2, for instance, so that the new geography subject leader has the background information, the background knowledge, in order to deliver a really effective staff meeting, and to ensure that that the other staff members get some high quality CPD. So it talks about theoretical knowledge, it talks about physical landscapes and human settlements and climatic variations and spatial awareness, and it talks about cultivating critical thinking and problem solving skills. So it talks with great depth, but it also does it in a way that the teacher should be able to, or the subject leader should be able to work with their colleagues. And if there's subject leadership that is something that Mrs. Curran didn't have to do, that staff members have to do now, then subject leadership itself also has tasks and administrative tasks associated with it that staff in the 80s didn't have to do. So one of those, for instance, might be the development of curriculum plans. So here I've written a quick conversation with Kira where I said, brilliant, thanks, except now I've realised that I haven't updated the curriculum plans. If I give you the knowledge base for the map work unit, can you turn it into a sequence of 6 lessons? And I've copied in the knowledge base from a curriculum unit about about map work. Very quick copy and paste job. And Kira will take that knowledge base for the mapping skills unit for year 4, and that'll sequence it into a sequence of 6. I asked for 6 lessons, so it'll sequence that into an overview of 6 lessons with a knowledge focus for each, a vocabulary focus, some activities, and a learning outcome for each, because it knows what is the expectation of the EIF. It knows what the expectation is of working within a school at the moment, and it can turn a knowledge base into a simple set of curriculum plans. And it can adapt those curriculum plans. So if you wanted that for a 5-lesson learning period, it would do it in a 5-lesson learning period. If you wanted to do it for an 8-lesson learning period, it would do it in an 8-lesson learning period. And that can be something that I know from experience that school staff can spend an awful lot of time doing and taking away from their job as teachers of a class as well. And then similarly, there are other jobs that Mrs. Curran didn't have to do, one of which would have been presenting assemblies. And I'm old enough to remember my primary school head teacher giving every assembly. And yet I know from experience that certainly more willing teachers and leaders quite often get pressed into action to deliver an assembly. So we might say to Kira, we might say, amazing, but now I've realised I have to give an assembly after lunch on the importance of being a good friend. School values friendship, and it's for infant children. Could you write me a story? And Kira will do it nice and quickly, and it'll change that story each time. So today's story is generated a story about the day that Sonny made new friends, and it'll include the stage directions to bring some children out to the front, so that the keeping it nice, interactive, and interesting, because it knows the sort of assembly that we would give to infant children within an English school. So it saves an awful lot of time for the teacher of the class or the person that's been asked to step into the breach to deliver the assembly. And finally, Mrs. Curran didn't have to write copy for social media channels or for the newsletter or for the intranet or to update the head teacher. So I might say, brilliant, finally I have to send an email to the head teacher with an update of the half term to go in the newsletter. Give a little bit of information about Beeston Castle and some charity fundraising, and Mohammed's success in the European Taekwondo competition. And Kira will do that. It'll draft the newsletter, the piece for the newsletter, or it'll draft the piece for the social media channels or for the intranet, so that the teacher can save the time, but also it'll do it in a way that's not immediately apparent that it's been written by an AI. And I think as things progress, we're all becoming quite adept at spotting where something's been written by an AI. And askKira, it's less easy to tell that that's the case. So those are some of the ways that askKira can help do some of the tasks that teachers in the 80s, such as Mrs. Curran and my Auntie Pat and my Auntie Barbara, didn't have to do in comparison to what teachers have to do now. And the other thing that Kira will do is something that they also didn't do. And I'm old enough to remember spending a lot of time queuing up at my primary school teacher's desk, waiting for my work to be marked, because the marking took place during the lessons. And obviously a lot of our teachers spend an awful lot of time marking work at the end of the school day and taking it home, and Kira can help with that as well. So if we click on the create chat button at the top here, and we go down to mark work with Kira, and then we click here on the drag and drop files or click to browse, we can open some work that we've uploaded into our computer. And what Kira will do, if we click here, is it will do the marking for us in the format that we would expect within an English school. So what it's currently doing is reading the children's handwriting, it's transcribing it, it's working out what the strengths of the pieces of work are. It's also working out what the areas for development of the pieces of work are and the estimated reading ages. And then most importantly, it's amalgamating all that information together in the same way that an English teacher would do, or an English school teacher would do, to generate some whole class feedback. So it's looking across the pieces of work, and it's generating the set of common misconceptions across all the pieces. And crucially, it's coming up with a range of suggested activities that the teacher could do during the next lesson in order to improve the work of the children. So it's looked at the strengths and the areas for development, and then it's analysed the areas for improvement across the students. So it's said that there are areas for development around handwriting practice, and also a suggestion of a punctuation workshop. And the suggested activities come up with would be a handwriting relay, a fun and interactive activity, and then also a punctuation puzzle activity where students are given sentences without punctuation and asked to correct them. And a teacher could take that suggestion for an activity at the start of the next day, go up to Kira again, and ask Kira to generate that text. Please, can you generate me an unpunctuated piece of text for this lesson starter? And then copy that in there, and Kira will generate an unpunctuated text for the lesson starter so that the teacher can address the misconceptions from the previous day's children's work. We just press on the clipboard and we can copy that into Smartboard or into PowerPoint or into whatever the various IT that's used within the school, so that the teacher can focus on the learning of the children and focus on the relationships with the children and moving the learning forward, rather than spending huge amounts of time trying to generate what the misconceptions were in the first part. So in summary, askKira was developed to be augmented intelligence. It was developed to help with recruitment and retention, and with workload, with well-being, and with practical expert advice. And it was most importantly developed to take some of the tasks from teachers that work in schools at the moment away from them, to help them with those tasks so that they can enjoy the same status, quality of life and well-being that Mrs. Curran, my Auntie Pat, my Auntie Barbara did, so that they can retire 38, 40 and 42 years into their professional life, having had a wonderful experience as a teacher within our schools, which is still the best job in the world.